Hello and welcome to UO Today. I'm Barbara Altman, Director of the Oregon Humanities Center. Today we're on location in the Coeta and Donald Barker Gallery of the Jordan Schnitzer Museum of Art. Our guests, Sam Abell and Torben Ulrik Nissen, are photographers whose work is featured in the exhibit Amazonia. Sam Abell's 40-year career has been dedicated to achieving art through documentary photography. He has pursued his goals primarily through sustained assignments for the National Geographic Society, where he worked for 30 years. At the same time, he has maintained a career as a writer, teacher, and lecturer on photography. His career is the subject of the book Sam Abell, The Photographic Life, published in 2002, and accompanied by a traveling exhibition organized by the University of Virginia Art Museum. His recent books, Seeing Gardens and The Life of a Photograph, were published by the National Geographic Society. Torben Ulrik Nissen's career as a photographer has been devoted to documenting global humanitarian and ecological issues. In pursuit of these subjects, he has traveled for 2 decades to record and report on stories of consequence, from landmines in Angola to global warming in Antarctica. His primary collaboration has been with Danish non-governmental organizations. He has also sustained an extensive career as a writer, lecturer, and designer of programs exploring the issues he has documented. Most recently, he is the co-founder of the online art gallery Post Art, Art Beyond Borders, which seeks to give voice and a fair market to African artists. Sam, Torben, welcome.
Thank you, Barbara.
I know you're doing a lot of media events, so thank you for taking the time to talk to us on UO Today.
Pleasure.
It's especially wonderful to have you sitting in front of your photographs, so I hope we get a chance to talk about a lot of the images. Sam, I wanted to start by addressing some questions to you, if you're willing. The exhibit is very beautiful. It's really visually stunning. I'm wondering if you could tell us what the genesis of the project was.
In 2003, I was invited by the Oakwood Foundation of Charlottesville, Virginia, which is organized and sustained by the Grisham family, John Grisham, the author, and his wife, Renee. And Renee specifically asked me if I would undertake a photographic documentation of a pristine area of the Amazon in Peru, an area of great biologic diversity and great fragility. And scientists were concentrating on preserving this landscape because it is one of the richest areas for botany and flora and fauna in the world. And I have to tell you, at first I said no. I had just finished 2 long projects for National Geographic, one on Lewis and Clark, one on the Mississippi River, and I was uninspired by all of the hydroengineering that had gone on to tame and take the wildness right out of those rivers. So I'd had it with rivers. But Renee asked me again, and I reconsidered, and I thought, this is a wild landscape. This is a wild river, the Amazon. And if I can confine it to a certain area in Peru and symbolize all of the Amazon by concentrating on this one area, these small rivers that form the jungle headwaters, then that's manageable. And I accepted. And on the very first trip, I met Torben, who's a very distinguished Danish wildlife photographer. And he'd been down in the Amazon for 2 months. And he and I struck up a friendship and a partnership of equals. We were colleagues. And that was the beginning of a months and then years-long documentation of this rare, special, fragile, intact area of the Amazon.
Do you feel that you accomplished what you wanted to do, that looking at the area in which you traveled extensively, you were able to represent the whole region that the Amazon represents?
Yes. I think that the plants and animals that visitors to the gallery will see in our photographs are the animals that exist in Brazil and in Ecuador and in Colombia and throughout the Amazon. The Amazon is approximately the size of the 48 states. So it's a vast area. Would extend from the Pacific, that's where we were, where the Andes mountains come down to the jungle floor. We were working right at the base of the Andes. But it extends for 3,000 miles to the Atlantic Ocean. And these same animals populate the entire biosphere of the Amazon. That's why we called it Amazonia, not Peru or small rivers of Peru, or jungle rivers, or jungle life. We called it Amazonia because the Amazon is a world, and I think that in the walls of this gallery, that world is represented. A visitor to this gallery will be in a world. They won't be in a gallery. They'll be in Amazonia.
The word itself has all kinds of mythology attached to it, doesn't it? I'm sure that adds to the richness of this as a title.
It does add to the richness, and I think it was that word all by itself that overcame my objections to going. I have to say, it's an unphotographed area. In my 30 years as a National Geographic photographer, I never worked in a place that was as demanding and difficult physically and photographically.
I was struck when I was reading the catalog copy. There's a beautiful catalog that accompanies this exhibit. Not only are there real physical dangers, you also used the term visual claustrophobia. You were reluctant to go into the jungle because of visual claustrophobia. Would you expand on that a little bit?
The Amazon is dense in detail, and photographers I know from my career would like to work in the deserts, or in Antarctica, or in a studio where there are clean walls, like the walls in this gallery. And the Amazon is the opposite of that. A towering canopy that shuts out light, a torrid tropical sun that creates destructive contrast where things are excessively dark and right next to it, excessively bright. And out on the playas where we camped, where this picture was taken, it's intensely bright. It's one of the brightest places on earth to be on one of these playas. So you can go from a radically bright environment, destructively bright, to a destructively dark environment. The wildlife photographers that we're used, the wildlife photographs that most people are used to seeing come from Africa, particularly East Africa, where the landscape is open to the sky, and it's like being in a studio. And the animals are very visible. In the Amazon, the animals are cryptic, nocturnal, defensive, and have eons of well-developed behavior to not be seen. And so a visitor to the Amazon can see trees and water and hear the insects, and occasionally maybe hear some crashing in the background or some monkeys way up high in the canopy. But for photographers, we actually had to see the animals. And also we had a philosophy of not baiting or luring or in any way artificially attracting the animals. So the animals that we met, the animals that are pictured here, are actual encounters. And what we wanted the viewers of our photographs to feel, we wanted them to feel present in the Amazon. So this photograph, for example, we want people, when they walk up to it, to feel as though they were standing in front of it. And so it was a philosophy of photography, kind of a dogma, where we would use only certain lenses, we wouldn't interfere with the wildlife, and we would try in our photography to make people feel present, so that they feel like Torben and I felt when we stood there.
Seeing this particular three-toed sloth.
Exactly. Right.
Yeah. Two of the terms that you used repeatedly, I think, in your introduction to the catalog are you needed to be opportunistic, and I gather what that means based on what you just said is if the creature presented itself, you needed to be there right at that moment. You needed to respond immediately to anything that was happening around you. Is that correct?
That's right. This is a good example. Our boat came around that bend in that river, and someone shouted out, "There's a sloth." Sloths spend 99.9% of their lives, their entire lives, in trees, in the canopy, where they are invisible. With us on this trip was a woman who'd spent 30 years studying the tropics in Peru and in other tropical countries in the Amazon. And she was almost angry that on my first trip, I had seen a sloth on the beach. And she put her finger in my face. She said, "Sam, if you make 1,000 trips to the Amazon, you will never see this again." And she walked off. And I really do think I hadn't earned it. in her opinion. But that is a classic case of opportunism, of being opportunistic and being ready. And I have to say, of all of the photographers I've worked with in the field, Torben was the most attentive and alert photographer that I ever saw. Hours and hours and hours would go by when you wouldn't see anything. You'd be traveling in this small boat up these rivers. And he was always vigilant with his cameras. And I saw that on the first trip, and I thought, this is a good person. This is a conscientious photographer. And that's what it's going to take to make photographs. And a lot of the photographs in the exhibit were made from our boat, which is another degree of difficulty, to be in a moving boat, photographing moving animals that want to leave the scene and will, in a moment, be gone. And so attention, rigorous attention, and being open to opportunities.
So it was technically demanding, physically demanding. I would expect that you would either bond very quickly and get along well, or you would not be able to work together under those conditions.
We never had a hard day, and there's an unusual characteristic, another thing that's not so conducive to photography. On the equator, where we were, the days divide sharply between light and dark. There's 12 hours of daylight, immediately followed by total darkness. At 6 o'clock, bang on, it's dark. And that means 12 hours of darkness. And we would, in our conversations in the tent, map out our strategy and our philosophy of photography. And in my long career, I never had that kind of conversation that went on for hours and days and weeks and months, spilling into years, about the ethics and aesthetics of wildlife photography. And so this is a very, how should I say it, thought out and well-considered set of photographs. It arises from our conversations.
Those long hours in the dark,
Right.
in the wet tents.
In the wet tents.
Right. Torben, may I turn to you? What were you doing there when Sam happened to come into the Amazon jungles?
Well, I went down there with a good friend who was a wildlife biologist, and he was down there to study the macaw licks, especially all the mineral licks, to find out what would they feed on. We all know that birds and mammals that are only vegetarians, they have to get some minerals, and that's why they go to the clay licks to get that. And we took a lot of studies, samples from the clay licks to trying to find out what kind of minerals would they go for. And we also put up in that area around 30 camera traps, and that I helped with that. And we had this very exciting experience that still you have to catch this mammal, but we found a deer. We have a picture of a deer that is never seen. But you have to catch it and take a DNA test to find out if it's really new. And it hasn't happened so far. But I mean, that's what you can uncover out there. That is really something very special, that you are in a world where still thing is to be found.
So really, there's scientific discovery happening on these expeditions.
And the first time I met Sam, he took a picture of my friend and I sitting there with the photograph, because he brought the photograph from Cusco. So we didn't know about what was on our pictures from the camera traps. And there we saw jaguar, puma, and so forth. I said, oh, that's great.
Could you just explain what the trap is? I know from having read the introduction, but it means that the camera is triggered, the shutter is triggered by some kind of motion, is that correct?
You put it on a tree, and you have to do it very, very carefully, because the ants, the termites comes, and they eat up the cameras. That's what hard conditions out there. And then you have a sensor on the other side, and then you have to make the window special, so if only a small animal will pass, it won't, the shutter won't go off. So we have to find out how fast moving the animals should be. And of course, we also caught some of the guides walking around to take care of the forest, the promotores. But we got this huge amount of very interesting pictures that we never saw. I mean, the armadillo, we never saw.
Right.
Because they are night animals. They are living out at night, and we can't get it. because that's one other side of our dogma. We never used flash, never artificial light. And that's a dogma I learned back from Denmark for the dogma movies. They never used artificial light, so that's how it is. We put that into our dogma as well.
And also as part of your own principles for your joint project,
Oh,
you
yes,
didn't
sure,
use
sure.
any camera traps, right? It was
No
all...
camera traps, no artificial light,
And no filters,
no filters.
and no cropping of the images?
That's right.
So,
And no remote cameras.
so
No,
what we
Nothing
see,
digital.
so what we see in these splendid wall-size reproductions of them is what you saw. Is
That's
what you
right.
saw through
That's
the
a
camera.
frame.
Yeah.
You see the
It's-
frame, yeah.
We put on ourselves the traditional discipline of a documentary photographer, the classic hard discipline of no cropping of pictures. And that places on the photographer the responsibility to create in the viewfinder a complete and finished composition. So in addition to the difficulties that exist in the Amazon, we added another layer of difficulty because it was our ethic. And we felt that if we had a strong ethic, it would make for a strong body of work.
I can only imagine that you'd have to be very practiced photographers in order to get anything that you would then want to put up on the walls of an exhibit under those circumstances.
I mean, one of our points is also to talk about structure and movement. And especially when you talk about movement, it's tough to work with that. And we call it the four movements, because you have the movement of the boat going forward, and it's also bunging up and down, and you have the moving target, and then you have to move yourself and your camera. So that's a very difficult picture to get. And at the same time, we couldn't do anything after that. This should be inside the frame, because sorry, you didn't succeed. Sorry, it can't go in this exhibition. We didn't do anything in the afterwork.
You use the word ethics, Sam, and one of the phrases that comes up repeatedly is an ethics of contextuality. So that refers back to what you were saying about trying to place the creature in its habitat,
That's
right?
right. That's right. That was, I would say, the strongest part of our ethic and also our aesthetic ideal. The animal, yes, but the world that it inhabits also. So this sloth picture has the entire panorama of the Amazon, beginning with the clouds at the top, which are characteristic of a rainforest, the rainforest itself, the river with its tannin color, and then the playa and the sloth at the center of it. Because we have the idea that the Amazon is a totality. And by showing all of these animals in their setting, we make the case for the totality of the Amazon and bring forward the idea that by destroying one part of it, whether it's a river or a playa or a forest, all of the Amazon is interfered with and reduced and diminished and will disappear. So it's a photographic idea, but it's also an environmental idea, that the web of life is what sustains, it's self-sustaining. And so I think a visitor to the gallery will see this intricate and intimate world of beauty, but also the relationship of one thing to another. For example, I'm looking across the gallery at a picture of a morpho butterfly, and almost always the morpho butterfly with its dazzling iridescent blue wings is shown as a specimen. It's a close-up. Let's feature the blue. But here we show it sitting in the world that it inhabits. It happens to be on the regurgitated contents of a jaguar's stomach, and it's feeding on this rare gift. And it's feeding so heavily that it's relaxed its wings. This almost never happens. It was probably the rarest sight, one of the rarest sights that we saw was this open-winged morpho. And instead of shooting it as a close-up, I stepped back and placed it at the bottom of the composition. The rest of the composition, what is it? It's kind of mud and a kind of a muddy river and a distant forest. drab, you might say, but this is the actuality of the Amazon. This life-filled place is not a studio. It's often gritty, tough, difficult, but beauty lives within it. And it doesn't live outside in a studio. It lives on that riverbank. So showing the riverbank was as important. I think that it actually makes the morpho more beautiful.
It certainly stands out against that heavily camouflaged landscape where other things are indistinguishable from each other.
Right.
Some of the photographs exist in a couple of different images. There's a series or a set of two that introduce some movement into those creatures and into that landscape. I'm assuming that that was also a deliberate focus of yours.
Right, and I think it's a distinct benefit of this, or feature of this exhibition, is that there's room in this gallery to show what we call two views of one scene. And there's another scene of butterflies in a landscape, and there are probably 200 or 300 butterflies there quietly feeding. And all I did was walk up a couple of steps, and they, of course, were disturbed and flew up into the air. And the reason for having two is that I wanted to repeat that experience for the viewer. I wanted them to stand in front of the still picture, then move to the right, and get the feeling that they had stirred up the butterflies.
It certainly had that effect for me. Torben, I wanted to get back to you because I think it's probably quite unusual that both of you, so well known, so practiced, such masters of your crafts, the pieces of that craft, actually came together and did this project as a joint initiative. Torben, I'm wondering if it was the ethical, ecological project behind this that was one of the things that enticed you to join Sam.
Oh, sure. And I mean, I went down there because I would really like to spread the word about the Amazon. Also into education, I think that's very important also to bring in young people. And one of the reasons why I went down there was I would try with this wildlife biologist also to make some material to create the awareness of the environmental problems down there. And in the small video I made on the first trip when I met Sam, I just left it because now still photography was the main focus. But we have in this small, because we ran over and get into scenes where we saw loggers, hunters, mining, and they are really threats to the rainforest. But we didn't bring it into this universe on purpose. You don't see, you see two of our guides, but there's no people from the rainforest here. That's another subject somehow. We know from a lot of television, from a lot of films, documentaries, that there are threats down there. We all know about the logging, the mining, but we wanted to show the world that still's there. And that's what we will. We hope that people will see this like once we saw the Mother Earth from a spaceship and looked at it and said, how beautiful is this, but also how fragile it is. We hope that perhaps this will give the same sensation.
There's a lot of data available about the destruction happening in that area, but there's also a lot of data available about what that piece of the Earth contributes to the entire globe. And it's really pretty stunning. Were you surprised by anything you learned as you were doing this?
Well, I mean, I think we came there during 5 years, and we could see the change. We could really see the change, and that's where we benefited from the scientists. They could really see change in some of the trees that decayed in a different way. So something is going on. The first time I went there, the 2 months I went there, in that area where we mainly were going around, there were 2,000 loggers there, cutting down the rainforest. But interesting to know is that the scientists, they said, okay, they take the mahogany trees, the cedar trees, and so what? We have around 1,000 different trees in that area. But the problem was the hunting. 2,000 people out there, they go hunting. And that was a very, very big threat. Coming back on our last trip, we went up that river. no lockers at all. It's totally closed off. It's only for scientists and for the two of us. We were allowed to go up there. And it's amazing that you see how fast the wildlife will get back. It will regenerate. And that's our hope. What we really fear about this area is that they are trying now to make a highway, the Amazonian highway. And what we have seen, every time you see a road going somewhere in the unknown, a couple of years it will be inhabited and forests cut down, hunting, and it will look like urban areas. So that's, I think, one of the very big threats to this area. And you have to take into consideration, too, that we have been that close to uncontacted people. They still live up there. 2 times we were stopped not to go up there because the uncontacted Indians came down the river to pick up turtle eggs for feeding. And we know when they do that, we are not allowed to go up there because you have to respect, they have chosen to be uncontacted. So if they want contact, they should contact us. They're still there. But when the highway will come, well, big problems. But that leads back to one of our, I think, common views that also this exhibition is about. We have a lot of problems, but we have to show the hope as well. And in beauty, there's hope.
That is a lovely phrase on which to begin to wind this up. I'm afraid we're running out of time, but in beauty there is hope. Sam, you want to add anything else to that?
That's a perfect sort of epilogue to, or epigram to our discussion and to this exhibition. There are a number of ways to approach the subject of the Amazon, and beauty is one of them, this beautiful place. And I think that we present a door to people with this exhibition, and they can walk through that door drawn into a concern and an awareness of the Amazon through beauty, being enticed into the subject by beauty of the plants, the animals, the insects, the totality of the Amazon. It affected us, it changed my life, and our mission here is to pass it on.
Thank you. I couldn't think of a better way to close that. Thank you both so much for doing this. Our viewers will certainly want to know that you are here in March to do a masterclass and to do gallery talks. So I hope people will take advantage of that. And I think it has changed my life already, and I'm hoping to come back repeatedly to look at them. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We have been speaking with Sam Abell and Torben Ulrik Nissen, whose work is featured in the Amazonia exhibit at the Jordan Schnitzer Museum of Art. The show runs through May 2nd, 2010. Thanks very much for watching.